Everybody, welcome. My name is Dan Barker, and I am a senior product manager at a company called Nintex. Who in here has heard of Nintex? Oh, wow, a lot of you. Very good. Okay, cool. So for those of you who already know about Nintex, if you're not familiar with Nintex, maybe you've heard of a company called Drawloop. They do document generation. We made an acquisition about 2 years ago and acquired them, and we now have their document generation capabilities within our workflow platform, and I'm going to be showing you that here today, along with a lot of the other stuff that we have along with the Nintex platform. So before we start, a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm a senior product manager for Nintex, and why I'm qualified to talk to you today about this topic is that I've been in your shoes. So I've been a developer. I was an architect for a while, so I did development for about 10 years. Are any developers in here by chance? Okay, there's a few of you. Very cool. So I've been there. I moved from development over into more of a business role, process, architecture, business analyst, and then I turned product manager about 5 years ago. So I've been in your shoes. I've developed processes specifically about 6 years ago. I worked for Progressive Insurance in strategic vendor management. So I know what it's like to deal with contract lifecycle. We did it across $500 million of IT spend and about 20,000 contracts. So and we had a lot of different teams and people and systems involved, so it was very difficult. So I know how it is to try to automate these things across the different teams and the people that are typically involved in something like this. So if you're not familiar with Nintex, we're a very simple point-and-click workflow platform that basically helps you automate every person, department, and system in your environment, both inside and outside of your organization. And that's really important because a lot of times when you're dealing with process, most of the things that you do when you're automating is only on maybe an island. Maybe you're automating only things in Salesforce, or maybe you're only automating things in different parts of the environment. And so what we do is we connect those agnostically in the cloud and make that really, really easy. And we do it through user-centric workflow, which involves the people that are a part of these different processes. So regardless of your platform, and no matter where you keep your content, we help automate all these processes. And so what I plan to do is spend most of my time showing you how this works in demo. And hopefully you can see it for yourself and see how powerful it is. As I progress through this, we're going to talk a little bit about the Nintex platform. So what is that? What is the Nintex platform? Well, I'm really excited because there's so many good things to talk about. I really don't have time to go into everything, but I do want to give you a really high-level overview of it. So like I mentioned, we're talking about an agnostic workflow engine in the cloud that can connect out to different systems. And so we have the workflow engine and we have the workflow designer. And I'm going to show you that here in a second. We also have embedded forms into that experience. So a lot of forms are kicked off, and because we're agnostic, we can listen for events in Salesforce. We can be programmatically called from an application, which is great. We can get kicked off by a form, which is very common. So typical processes are usually started by a form being filled out. We have a nice drag and drop, really cool forms experience that's built right into the workflow product. We also have document generation. So we're dealing with processes. We need to be able to connect systems and certainly the content. So our document generation capability automates document generation from any data source, and that's really important. It's not just one data source, it's multiple. And then once you automate something, which is a great milestone, it's very difficult to do, we provide you this really powerful Hawkeye lens across that so that you can see all of your processes. And that's just the beginning. Once you automate, that's kind of like the beginning of the process, right? You can further look at the process and optimize it going forward. So it gives you some business and analytics intelligence on top of the automations that you've created. And for the developers in the room, if I'm going through the demo and you're thinking, man, there's a system that we have that I don't see in the toolbox, no worries, we have you covered. We have something called the extensions framework where you can build your own connector. And it's really simple. It's very similar to the one Salesforce has. It uses OpenAPI and Swagger. Makes it really easy to create your own connector. All right, so now that we know a little bit about Nintex and what we do, let's talk about the current challenge at hand in contract lifecycle management. So most every company has to deal with contract management at some level, and every company does it a little bit differently. And as a result of this, with any contract, there's multiple teams involved. And typically, and it might be a little different in your environment, in your company, but these multiple teams usually start with a marketing motion, maybe a lead that's coming in, maybe it's from a form, could be a lot of different things. There's a lot of leads being generated this week, right, at Dreamforce. That gets handed over to a sales team, salesperson. That person is then going to nurture that lead, talk to the customer, try to land the business, and then at that point, legal might need to get involved because there's contracts involved in quotes. We need to get approvals, and then once the T's and C's are kind of solidified and we have a contract in place, we need to get signatures, and then the business is booked, and that's great. That's a great start. That's the beginning of the relationship. Then it hands over to finance, right? Then it begins the fulfillment motion. All right, we actually landed the customer. That's awesome, but now we need to get them what they need and make sure that they're in good shape. And then beyond that, there's account management as we grow the business. So there's a lot of teams. And with all these teams, there's disconnected systems. So I don't know what your environment looks like, but a lot of the ones that I've worked in look like this. You have a lot of different systems, enterprise file sync and share, ERP, CRMs, proprietary apps, mobile apps. And so when you're trying to automate things, it's really almost impossible sometimes to actually look at the entire process holistically across all the different components. So multiple teams, multiple systems, and where there are gaps, where you can't automate, what we have in the middle is a ton of manual process, like manual effort. It's really difficult. So when we have this challenge of these three things, it results in a lot of different problems. So basically it slows down the ability to get cash and grow the business. So because of all this manual effort, sales teams, they have a lot of administrative tasks, as you guys know, and that drains selling time, very difficult. The legal teams that are involved, if there's no automation and there's nothing actually creating some dynamicness to how the process is managed, it exposes compliance risk with these contracts. So I remember at Progressive, just about every they were contract managers, they had their own drives, and they had all their contracts in their drives. So they had their own versions of all the contracts. And we would find out post-mortem after signatures were done if they were missing a provision or something that wasn't right, and the legal team would be upset. And so it was really hard. So that exposes a lot of compliance risk there. And then when you don't have things automated, it doesn't support the business growth there if there's a lot of manual effort. So we have multiple teams, multiple systems of records, and a lot of silos. All right, so here's the great part about this session is I'm going to talk to you about how Nintex Workflow for Salesforce enables contract process automation for everyone across all the systems of record. And as I mentioned earlier, our workflow technology is agnostic, and it can connect to anything. And we want to do this, I want to mention really quick, we want to make this process data-driven, which is really important, going back to document generation. And we want to make it event-driven. So the event could be a form. The event could be something happening in Salesforce or another system, or something programmatically calling out to our workflow engine to start things off. And you'll see a little bit more about what I mean by that here in a second. So let's talk about the players within the demo that I'm going to give you today. I plan to spend 90% of our time in demo. I don't want to do death by PowerPoint. It's never fun. So the first person that we're going to talk about is the admin. The developer, probably like yourself, you're trying to automate things. And in this case, our designer is going to be using Nintex for Salesforce. They're also going to be heavily leveraging document generation. They're going to be enabling the sales organization. In this case, our salesperson, his name is Kason. Kason's going to be working very closely with a customer. This customer's name is John. He works for the NFL, a very good customer or opportunity here. And then as he tries to land a business, legal is going to get involved from a contractual standpoint. And we're going to have some interactions between legal and the customer as we move towards getting the contract signed. And the really cool part about what we're going to walk through here today is that we're not adding another element to your stack. We're not adding another layer to this environment that's already pretty perforated with a lot of different systems. We're using email. We're going to use e-signature. In this case, it could be DocuSign or Adobe. And we're using Salesforce. So very simple tools with a ton of power, and you'll see that here in a second. All right, so let's jump right into the demo. Hopefully you guys can see that. I'll make it a little bigger. So we're going to start in the opportunity view. And Kason, our sales rep, has done a really great job working this lead, nurturing it, and we're at the proposal stage. And we have a few things that I want to point out here as we set the stage for this process. We have a couple products here in the opportunity. The first one, online admin training and hosted admin training. So Kaysen works for a company called Cephalo. They provide IT services, and the NFL is really interested in these two things. So if I jump into the products themselves, I want to point out two things that are really important. Number one, we have a list price or a retail price, and then a discounted price. So this is very common. When you're getting ready to land business, you're talking to a new customer, you're going to try to nurture that in the beginning, and in this case, we want to make sure that we provide some really good pricing for the NFL. So as a result, we're providing a discount, and so at this point, Kaysen's ready to get approval for these discounts. And this is the beginning of the Nintex integration into Salesforce, which is really, really powerful. So the first thing we're going to see is, and these are all Lightning components, and they can be dynamically shown or hidden depending on where you're at in the process here. But this is a Nintex form here. It's a very simple one, but this gives Kaysen the ability to provide some justification for this particular pricing approval. So I'll say this. Opportunity has a lot of upside. And what this is going to do is going to submit a form. And this form is going to actually kick off a workflow. Before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump from Salesforce over to the designer mode so you can kind of see what these things look like inside of Nintex as we're moving forward. So the first thing I'm going to show is that form that we just saw. So what we're looking at here, this is Nintex Workflow Cloud. This is the workflow designer. And this is the drag and drop canvas where all the magic happens. And off to my left, we have a toolbox with actions that you can drag and drop onto the canvas. And when you do that, you can click it here. Off to the right, panel comes in, and you have a configuration pane. Point and click, super easy to do. So in this case, we already have a workflow here set up that's going to start through a Nintex form. And again, this form is very simple, but what I want to show you is it's really important to be able to iterate and add into these processes as they change, as they evolve, and you might need to make a change to this particular form. I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is going to be really easy. So let's add a multiple choice field in here. So you can see that there. Click done and close. So this is the start event. I'm going to publish this workflow. And basically what that means is we're going to publish it, and it's going to be available at that point, either available as a form or available as a REST endpoint, because every workflow that we publish is a REST endpoint, programmatically accessible. Or it starts to listen for the events that we've configured it to listen to. And I'll show you different flavors of this as we go forward. But I'm going to publish this change to the form, and I'm going to jump back into my Salesforce environment and just show you how easy it is to make these changes. So I'll just go ahead and refresh this. And because we've published the form on the Nintex side, we should see that change come through here in Salesforce seamlessly. All right, there we go. So super easy. We have a nice, I like to call it lightly coupled to Salesforce. So it allows you to be pretty agile with the changes that you need to make. All right, so Kaysen wants to get some pricing approvals rolling here. He likes this. He likes the pricing that he has, so he's going to go ahead and click submit. This is going to kick off a workflow. So let's jump back into Nintex, the designer, the workflow designer, and I want to show you a few things. So when you first log into Nintex Workflow Cloud, this is the dashboard. This is where all your workflows are at. And something to note here, every time a workflow runs, we get an instance of it. And that's what you're seeing here. This is a historical record of every workflow that's run. Gives you a date and a status of when it was completed. I'll go ahead and refresh this, and we should see a new workflow that's been kicked off as a result of filling out that form. And yes, we see one here. That's great, pricing approval. So if I click on this, we'll be able to see, and this is really dependent on what's configured in the actual workflow definition, everything that's happened since that form was submitted. So we have a lot of things happening here. We have an action name. These are the actions that you're dragging and dropping onto the canvas. We have a status, a start time, and end time. And in this case, moving all the way down here is that we're going to send an express approval. So this is the first notion of a task. And there's a there's different ways you can use tasks within Nintex Workflow Cloud, but in this case, it's a simple email that's saying, hey, we need to get pricing approval, and this pricing approval is going to go to Kaysen's manager. So let's take a look at what this looks like from Kaysen's manager side, and then we'll jump back into the workflow so you can see how that's configured. So if I jump into my mailbox here, I should have an email to Sarah. Sarah is Kaysen's manager. Sure enough, we do. And I'll go ahead and open this. And there's a lot of really cool stuff going on here. So first of all, the email is pretty straightforward. Hi, Sarah. This opportunity has a lot of upside. This is the data that we actually entered in the form. So you can seamlessly add that into the task. So we've created a task, and we've added in the information that the form's captured as a part of this email that's gone out to Sarah. So the attached GAM file was forwarded to you by Kaysen. This GAM, or global approval matrix, is being generated by the DocGen service. So document generation is pulling in all this contextual information from Salesforce and make it available in this spreadsheet that Sarah's going to take a look at. It's going to have rules in it based on approval logic that really basically says, depending on the level of discount, we need to go to different people within the organization. Again, this is where things are really hard to do when you're talking about starting a process and being able to connect it to different people and systems and track it. So in this case, Sarah's kind of the first person in this process where she can actually open up this document. It's going to give her all the information she needs to make this decision. So we have in this global approval matrix, which again, generated by the DocGen service. I don't know if you guys can see that. I can make it a little bigger. There we go. So we see the listed price, the retail price, the discount, and the GAM level. These are, again, dynamically generated levels of approval that you might have in your organization. It can be driven off of a lot of different types of logic. So in this case, we have a 24% discount, GAM level 2. So this falls in Sarah's lap as far as being able to approve it. And she can do one of two things. So she can either approve it or she can escalate it. And the workflow engine's smart enough to know when you respond with these outcomes, how to handle it. And you can build logic off of the type of response that you have. So if Sarah were to escalate it, the logic that we have in here, I'm not going to do it, but it would go to her manager. She might feel like, hey, I want to let someone else know in my organization about this discount. I want to let them know about this opportunity. It's with the NFL. It's got a ton of upside. We really want to, take care of these guys. They seem like a great opportunity for us, and maybe she wants to escalate. Could be a lot of reasons for that. In this case, she says, yeah, this looks pretty good to me. I'd like to get this moving, so I'm going to go ahead and respond with approved. She could respond with other content here if she wanted to, some justification if she needed to. But in this case, I'm just going to say approved, click send, and at this point, the workflow engine is going to pick that up, and I'll show you what that looks like back on the workflow side here in a second. So as this is happening, what's really neat is, again, we have the ability to update different systems of record. And because we have this approval running, you'll remember when we started here, we were in the pricing, the proposal price quote stage. We submitted for approval. We now have that approval. I'm going to go ahead and refresh Salesforce, and we should see this updated in Kaysen's view of the world, or anyone else who's looking at this opportunity. So we have price approval. You can see it here, approved by Sarah Paulson. You can see when it was approved. So we have the ability to make some updates here, which is really, really great. So what's going to happen now is, now that we have the quote ready to go, we need to generate a contract. So this is kind of the second step in this process, right? So we've got approval for the quote, and now we need to generate a contract. So let's actually jump over to the workflow designer and see how this is going to play out. All right, so another example of a really unique way of starting a workflow. This is, the other example that we looked at was a form. This one's called external start, and I mentioned earlier that every workflow that's published is a REST endpoint. So now we have this is started remotely through a programmatic call, which is really easy to set up. So you don't have to be a developer to set this up. If you're building processes and you want to create some logic that gets kicked off from an auxiliary app, service, what have you, that's maybe already in the environment, a BA, anyone with non-technical chops could easily go in here and create this. And basically, when it's done, when you've created this, hey, I need this data, I need you to send me this stuff. When you're ready and you publish this out, the workflow engine's actually going to provide the information that you could hand over to someone who would need to call it, and that's what you're seeing here. We're not going to get into too much of the detail on this, but this is basically the URL that you would need to call this workflow to start it programmatically. All right, so looking a little bit closer at some of the workflow logic and capability here, we have these collapsing sections, which is really nice. So as your workflow gets big, it's really easy to kind of group things. And the workflow designer's top to bottom, which I really, really like. I've been in some environments where you're kind of moving left to right and kind of turns into this like universe almost of logic. We keep things really simple, top to bottom, and it makes it really easy to kind of traverse through. So in this case, here is our first approval. And I kind of want to show you what that task looks like. So if you remember, Sarah, who's Kaysen's manager, got a task to look at the quote. This is what that task looks like in Nintex Workflow Cloud. So you can give it a task name. It says game approval. Here are the outcomes. Remember in the email we had approve and escalate. You can see those here. You can add additional outcomes if you want. You can create a lot of customization here in the subject, file attachments, message body. And you'll notice we have these blue pill type things. These are variables. So variables that are being sent into the workflow. You can build logic off of them. You can build communications off them. Really, really easy to do. And based on the response of that task, the workflow engine can respond. And you'll see we have two logic trees here. We have approved over here, and then we have the escalate, which we didn't do. So we did the approve. We can see that here. And what we're going to do is, once we approve it, we're going to generate a contract using the docgen action here. And this, again, is very simple. And towards the end of the demo, I'm actually going to show you what the document package looks like in Salesforce, so you can see that side of the house when it comes to when we generate a document. How would it look like to configure that? All right, so as a part of this contract being generated, it's going to kick off yet another workflow that's going to engage the customer, because we've got approval, and now we need the customer to get involved. And again, this is where, from a development standpoint or an admin standpoint, things get really hard, because now you're working with someone who doesn't have a Salesforce license, but they're really tightly coupled to this process. And in a lot of cases, at least in my experience, legal tends to slow things down just because they like to stay in email, and it's really hard to track what's going on. In this case, we're allowing them to be a part of this automated process seamlessly using email, which is fantastic. But in this case, the first step in the process is we want to send the contract out to the customer. So let's go to the customer experience. And again, we're talking about Jim, our customer who works for the NFL. And that contract's been generated, which is fantastic. And it says the contract has been sent to you for a review. And basically what Jim can do is he can look at this contract, make changes to it, and send it back. He can either say, yep, looks good, off we go, and respond with contract approved, or more likely he's going to say declined with edits, because I don't know about you, but most of the processes that I see aren't very linear. There's a lot of back and forth. I remember at Progressive, redlining, usually there's on average maybe 5 to 10 red lines back and forth on large contracts, very, very typical. So I'm going to go ahead and open this contract that was generated from the docgen service, sent from the workflow, and let's make some changes to this. So I'm going to edit the document, and it's probably hard to see here. Let me make this a little bigger. So in this document generation package, we've done some cool things. We've added the sales quote to make it really easy for Jim to see, and we have some T's and C's here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the net payment terms here from 30 to 90. I'm going to turn on all markup so you can kind of see that. The NFL likes to do 90-day payment terms, so they want that. And let's just say, just for the sake of showing you how this could work, maybe they want to take out one of these responsibilities here and change the contract in that regard. So I'll change that, and then I'll add V2 to this, just to kind of further differentiate this version from the original. So I'll go ahead and save it. And now what we're going to do, Jim's maybe reviewed this with his legal counsel, what have you, maybe with the procurement team, and I'm going to respond to this with this outcome. It's called declined with edits. And I might be thinking, what if somebody responds with an outcome that we're not used to seeing or we haven't configured? We have that covered too. It's automatically responded back and says, hey, we don't recognize that outcome. So if somebody were to put cheeseburgers in there and send it back to the workflow engine, the engine would be like, I don't know what that is. So here's the outcomes that you have that are valid. So it's smart enough to know that. I'm going to go ahead and attach the contract that we just made a change to. And then I'm going to respond to this email. And again, the workflow engine is going to be smart enough to pick up the outcome. It's going to pick up the file now with the changes, and it's going to route it to our legal counsel or our legal representative. So I'll go ahead and click send there. And again, the legal counsel here, they're not on Salesforce. They have no access to Salesforce. They're just a team that we're engaging with to get the contract in place and the T's and C's approved. So I'm going to jump back over to the Salesforce view of the world, because Kaysen now is on point. He's done everything he needs to, and he's handed things off to the customer. The customer's made changes to this contract, and now legal's involved. So Kaysen's kind of out of the mix for a minute. And what's really nice about this is now we can, again, make changes, make updates to different systems of record. In this case, it's Salesforce, to let Kaysen know, or anyone else looking at this opportunity, what's happening. And you can see here that the contract status says running. Contract was declined by Bravo and sent back for redlining. So he can see what's happening, understand what's going on, and have some insight to where the process is at. So let's jump over to the legal inbox. And again, because Jim said that, hey, we need to make some changes, now it's time for legal to open this up. Legal likes to use spreadsheets and email, and we got them covered here. This is a simple email. It says, dear legal, the attached contract has been sent back by, and this is all dynamically driven by the workflow, which is great, by Jim Bravo. And this opportunity, the opportunity name dynamically generated, and the legal person has the ability to do exactly the same thing that Jim did. We can open the contract. We'll go ahead and do that so you can kind of see that, in fact, we are working with the document that we made some changes to. I'll enable editing. Show all markup. And you can see here are the changes that we made earlier coming back from the customer. So there's the V2. We removed this part of the responsibilities, and we changed the payment terms from 30 to 90. So for the sake of brevity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and approve this. The NFL is cool with 90-day payment terms. This happens on occasion, so no problems with the changes made to this particular contract. And again, what could happen here, he could decline with edits, and this is typically what happens. So I'll spare you the drudgery of going back and forth in that regard. But the cool thing about the Nintex Workflow Cloud and the designer experience is that we have something called state machines. And this is a very powerful concept if you're not familiar with it, but this is basically what allows us to handle the nonlinear part of a process where there's a lot of back and forth. And most processes aren't, step one, step two, done. It can be a lot of, variations to that, and we can handle that pretty seamlessly. So I'll go ahead and click approve for the sake of brevity, and click send. All right, so now we're off and running. We've got a quote, we've got discount approvals, and we've got our contract, terms and conditions solidified, redlining is looking good. So really now the last step in this process is to get signatures on this contract. So before we do that, let me jump into the workflow and kind of show you again some more of the background from an administrative or process architect standpoint. So again, I want to show you this concept of a state machine, and we have this thing branch by stage reviews. These are the different stages that we can go in and out of that are noted by these different logic trees. And so we have an internal review. We have the ability to say, okay, if there's problems, move it to a different state. And then once we have an internal review that is approved, which we just did through legal, we can then move it to a different state, which is called send for signature. And this is what the signature logic would look like. And again, I'll expand this section. And as we noted earlier, I have 2 branches in here just for the sake of showing you what it would look like. Typically, you'd only have one, but you could have Adobe or DocuSign here where you're actually facilitating getting the signature. So if you want to see what this experience looks like, I'll click on Get Signature. And again, this is all drag and drop configuration. We're not doing any code here. As you start to get familiar with the design canvas and the experience across these different systems, we make it really easy, and it becomes pretty easy to actually integrate to different people and the different systems that you might have within your environment. So again, dynamically driven recipient name, recipient email, the message that comes through, and then from here on out, it's the e-signature experience that kind of takes over. So let's look at that. So let's go back into the customer view. So we have an email back to the customer saying we're ready to sign a contract. I'll go ahead and click this. This is the experience that you'd probably expect. We have the ability to see the quote, the changes we made, V2, net payment terms have been all a part of this. And I'll go ahead and sign this. Bravo. Oh. Lost my mouse there. There we go. Click apply. And again, this is yet another event that the workflow engine can recognize and respond to and move things forward. So let's go back into Cason's view. So things are moving along pretty well. Cason's feeling pretty good about things now that he's seeing these updates. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. And you'll notice that the approvals here, contract, sent for signatures. It's going to take a second for the signature to take hold. Once they're done, the events will be processed by the engine. And one thing I really want to show you here from a contract perspective, as we're making changes to the document or anything that we're doing in here, you can see we're making updates into Salesforce. So you have a system of record, you can see the original contract, you can see the red line, and then the finalized contract with signatures on it. In a lot of cases, you might see 5, 6, 7, 8 revisions in here, which is very common if there's a lot of back and forth from a redlining perspective. But you can see the 3 in here, and it makes it really easy from a governance standpoint to see when things happened and what the results were. All right, let's go back to the workflow engine and see what's happening with the signature and see from an instance standpoint where things are at. So I'll go back into my instances view, and we'll notice that the pricing approval workflow is completed, the contract redlining process is completed, and if I jump into the redlining details, you can see, again, a detailed record of everything that's happened within this process, which is great. And we're through the signature component. And now we're updating Salesforce here, attach file to record. This is, again, taking that signed contract, putting it into Salesforce, and we're off and running. All right, so I mentioned the DocGen side of things, and I want to show you what that looks like really quick as we wait for the signatures to come back through, because that's a very important part of this process. So these are the draw loop document packages, and the one that one of the ones we actually ran 2 of them. One of them is LTC contract. If I open this up, there's a couple of things I want to show you and make note of here. First, we have some templates here, and typically when we do a signature, there's 2 people that need to sign it. I skipped that step to make things easy for the demo, but typically you'd have the customer sign it and then the legal person sign it. I just had 1 signature on this, but here's where all of your templates are. And really importantly, there's delivery options from a document generation standpoint. This is very powerful. So I want to show you what this means when we're talking about workflow and being able to send, not only to trigger a workflow, but send data. So we have multiple delivery options. We have send for negotiation, route for negotiation. You could just download it. Remember, as a PDF, you could get it that way. Let's open up route for negotiation. And what this is going to do is it gives us the ability to specify which workflow that we want to fire and what's all the Salesforce-related metadata that we want to send the workflow. So when we kick a workflow off, we give it contextual information. That gives it the workflow power to understand where's this coming from, what opportunity is it, what's the file that we've generated, and the workflow engine can ingest all of that. And these are through these tags. So we're sending through, in this case, account ID, company, contact ID, and all this becomes variables that you can use in your workflow. Makes things, again, really easy and pretty powerful to leverage this information if you have downstream logic that you need to happen as a result of this. Another thing I want to point out is the contract itself. So we have something called component groups. So in these component groups, you have the ability to kind of dictate what gets put into the contract. And when you're doing things manually, this is the hard part. So this is yet another part that very difficult. There's a lot of risk, certainly from a compliance standpoint. The DocGen component here makes this super easy, and I'll show you what that looks like. So let's go into terms and conditions here. And what we're going to see is this is what we want this particular contract to look like. Here's the information that we want, and some of it's dynamically driven. And we can see here from a visual standpoint, it also dictates where the indentations are as a part of this particular contract. So that also is important from a readability perspective. So let's jump down here into payment, the payment section. So when you're doing business, oftentimes different states, different parts of the world, you need to have different clauses within your contract depending on where you're doing business. And in this case, we have one that's dictated by state. So if I jump into this particular area, I have the ability to add a business rule to say when the account object billing state equals California, we want to include this, this surcharge notion within the contract. Very simple, but again, this is the stuff that over time, as you're scaling things out, as you're doing business in different parts of the world with different types of products, it's very difficult to do. Another example of this is dynamically including maybe warranty information in this particular contract. So again, we can look out at the opportunity object, see what that warranty value is. If it's 1 year, we want to include the 1 year warranty. Obviously, if someone's only paid for 1 year and we give them the 2 year in the contract, that could be a problem. So again, this makes things really easy. All right, so that's the document generation, and this being the component group configuration that I wanted to show you. So again, this is all point and click. There's no code here. Pretty simple to do. All right, so Jim, our customer, now has a signed contract. We've sent that back to him. Now he has a record of it, which is great. Going back to Cason's view of the world in Salesforce, I'll go back to that opportunity. Hopefully this is updated. Yep, there we go. So here's the contract status completed. And again, we have that, that information here with the signed contract in the object that we've created that we're making some updates to. So pretty powerful stuff. So we've got 3 people involved in this process. Some of them are on platform, some of them aren't. We've got document generation, and we've got a lot of automated goodness that's happening here. So the last thing I want to show you as we wrap up is the business intelligence piece, right? So automating is an enormous first step. It's a great milestone. So if you can start to automate things that you weren't able to do before, that is a great milestone. Once you do that, you want to start to monitor that process so that you can continually make it better, improve it. And that's what our business intelligence layer via Hawkeye is all about. So let me go back in here and show you what that might look like. So in this demo, I didn't really have a lot of time, but you can add what we call Hawkeye Beacons into your workflow, and that means it's going to send information at different points in the process, wherever you want it, to say, okay, this step is done, this stage is done, timestamps, this is what happened, the outcomes, so you can understand what's happening. And then you can aggregate all of this up into a dashboard so you can kind of monitor it and see what's really happening. This is pretty powerful because now you're monitoring it, you can make further improvements, understand what's happening, you know, maybe between red line contracts and standard contracts, what kind of approval levels are we seeing on average, how long are things taking, average days to close the contract. This is really where the power comes in. Okay, we've monitored things, how can we make further improvements? How can we make this better? While reducing compliance risk and complexity. So those are all of the components here that I wanted to show you today. So in closing, typically something like this might take a couple weeks to actually land. And it's going to take a lot of code. It's going to be pretty fragile in a lot of cases. Apex, JavaScript, what have you. You might need some developer resources, some IT help. Extremely fragile in a lot of cases, and it's hard to maintain. This solution that I showed you today, really, it took less than a day. It's about 7 hours. And it's something that I, you know, as a recovering developer can do. And it's been a long time since I've been a developer. But no code here, which is great for me, or a process analyst, or a business analyst, or anyone who's managing these processes, or an admin in Salesforce. It's resilient to the Salesforce updates, which is great. And then there's zero deployment. Remember that form change we made? It went right back into the process. Really seamless, easy to do. All right, we're out of time. So with that, I'll end. We actually have like a minute, well, maybe just less than a minute left. That's the end of my demo. Hopefully you got some value out of that, but are there any questions at all as we wrap up?
Yeah, does that work for upsells as well once an opportunity is closed?
Say that one more time.
So if an opportunity is closed and you do an upsell, can you take it through the workflow again on a closed opportunity?
So the question was, on close, can I trigger basically another workflow process? Absolutely. So one of the events that we could listen for is a change to a stage closed. We kick off a workflow, and then you could do whatever you want. That's a great question. Very common use case, actually. So maybe there's some onboarding you want to do as a result of landing the business. That's a perfect catalyst to doing that. Okay, we've landed the business. Let's do some onboarding, and that's where you would do that. Good question. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, thanks, guys.